Oh, I bet you can. Okay, maybe you can see well enough now. E pluribus unum. It's a motto of the United States. In Latin, it means out of many, one. It refers to the union formed by the separate states. E pluribus unum was adopted as a national motto in 1776 and is now found on the Great Seal of the United States and on our U.S. currency. So on this weekend, when we celebrate the independence of the USA, I invite you to reflect with me on this core American value. But first, I'm a teacher. So a quick geography quiz. Okay. Do any of you recognize this wall? Anyone want to guess? Where is it? Someone saying, I heard China, but someone else said, it's Hadrian's Wall, built in the 2nd century AD in England to protect, yes, if you didn't realize, the Roman Empire at its largest extended up into England, and it protected the Roman Empire from the barbarians to the north. Yes, 773 miles from coast to coast across England at its narrowest point. Okay, I already heard the answer to this question. The Great Wall of China was actually begun in various pieces as early as the 7th century BCE, before the time of Christ. And it was to protect against the Eurasian steppe nomads that were to the north. And you all probably recognize this wall. Yep, the Berlin Wall. Okay, but I'm guessing most of you don't know what this wall was from. Egypt, good guess, good guess. It's actually a plaque that was excavated in Jerusalem from a wall that had been there. It was originally on a balustrade separating the court of Gentiles. If you look really close here, you can see the outermost, you've got the big wall around the whole temple court, temple area, and then right within the very immediate outer courtyard there was called the Court of the Gentiles. So that plaque I showed you the picture of was on a balustrade separating the Court of Gentiles and the Court of Jews. The writing you saw there was not only in Hebrew, but also in Greek, because that was the shared international language like English is now, but also it was in Latin because that was the government language of the region. And it read, get this, that piece of stone with all the little chicken marks on it, it read, no foreigner is allowed past this point on penalty of death. Yes, that was in the second period temple. The temple grounds, which you see here, during the time of Jesus, consisted of 5 different courts: the Gentile court, the court of women, of course we had to be separated, Israelite court, priest's court, and then the Holy of Holies. By far the largest of the courts was this Gentile court. The Gentile court was 1,200 feet in length and surrounded that entire temple area. It was paved with marble and was surrounded by colonnades on all 4 sides. It was not called the Gentile court because Jews didn't go there. No, it was because this was as far as the Gentiles could go in the temple enclosure to worship God. So why did the Jews even build this Gentile courtyard within their second period temple? or Second Temple. It was because they were obeying what Isaiah called for, that the temple should be a house of prayer for all people. So I find it kind of interesting how these non-Jews were allowed to pray at the temple, but only if they kept themselves separate and remembered their religious second-classness. And I think to myself, would I have wanted to even pray there next to people who would kill me if I stood next to them? So it is this dividing wall of hostility within the temple that Paul is referencing here in this Ephesians passage. Yeah, thanks, Mark. We humans build walls out of fear and a need for safety, don't we? Perhaps safety from a psychological harm, maybe from a sense that we don't want to be spiritually contaminated. Maybe it's also physical safety. I don't think I need to develop the rationale for this sermon this morning. We all know too painfully well the fears and indifferences in our society that are being created. They are within our families, mine no exception, our communities, our nation, our world internationally. Our own walls of hostility are many and varied, invisible and visible. And I'm no angel in how I'm responding with fear. I'm guilty of character assassination, of disparaging those who make me feel threatened, and feeling an internal angst because of my own hostility. I'm searching for spiritual answers, to be very honest. So when my dad, who's a New Testament theologian, suggested this passage for my sermon today, I was eager to see how it might bless. So here's this verse from Ephesians. It says, he destroyed the barrier, the dividing wall of hostility because of his death. And I'm like, oh yeah, I'm a Christian. I've grown up. Jesus died for me. But okay, when I really think about it, how could Jesus' death put hostility to death? How can the cross actually reconcile people? What's the mechanism of action here, I want to ask as a nurse? There are undoubtedly other ways to unpack this passage, but in my few minutes, I just want to share a few thoughts that I hope can move us towards an answer. I'm not going to pretend to be God here. So I would suggest we have 3 answers, potentially, and I will organize them in this way. So I will begin with the first one here, and it's inspired by, the moral psychologist Jonathan Haidt. And he wrote this book a few years ago, The Righteous Mind. Don't you just love the title? The Righteous Mind, Why Good People Are Divided by Politics and Religion, right? We're all wondering this. Well, through his research, he has observed that human tribalism is a part of human development. And indeed, by cohesing as groups, as tribes, you might say, this builds group cohesion and cooperation, which is what allows us to survive. It's natural for a tribe to then, however, other non-tribal members and to have a righteous anger against those who counter. When we believe that the other is on another side, we then attribute evil to them. And if the other is evil, then this can't be compromised if we're going to be righteous. So therefore, we go to war. We also look for confirmation bias to support our warring. We self-justify believing whatever we say to defend ourselves. Our views of what is right versus wrong are explained by these 6 core moral priorities or foundations that he identifies. These, he has found in his research, differ by culture, by personality. There are individual and group uniquenesses. So I'm not going to summarize each of these, but I want to invite you to think for a moment about how you'd prioritize yourself in terms of these moral foundations. Which ones do you maybe rank highest? Is it caring, fairness, being loyal, respecting authority, sanctity, supporting, ensuring that, and liberty, freedom? Well, in Haidt's research, he has found that liberals tend to endorse caring as a moral foundation above all others, almost disproportionately above all others. Liberals also place a lot of emphasis or respect or support for the foundation of fairness and loyalty, but not quite as much as caring. In contrast, conservatives endorse each one of these pillars more equally, maybe not as high as liberals do for caring, but across the board, they endorse all of these moral foundations. So what Haidt's research underscores is the efficacy of what Isaiah recommended, and that is we need to come together and reason. Come, let us reason. Or when I looked at the original Hebrew last night, reason means to decide or argue or judge. So let us come together and make our decisions. This makes sense, right? Because persons with divergent ideas and ways of thinking, when we share those, our own biases can be challenged and wisdom can be generated. Janara Narenberg, the author of a recent book that came out on neurodiversity called The Diverse Mind, noted how speaking up with a diverse position in the face of a norm is typically seen as antisocial, even when it is really someone wanting to support the fundamental values of the group. Or, as Stephen Covey put it, if a person of your intelligence and competence and commitment, and I would add in there even someone with lesser, disagrees with me, then there must be something to your disagreement that I don't understand, and I need to understand it. You have a perspective, a frame of reference I need to look at. So how to illustrate that and apply that in my own life? The best I can do right now, maybe, is to share with you how just a week or so ago, so for my exercise and my silent time, I often take a walk around the Rose Bowl. And my way of being environmentally sensitive and supportive is I learned that there are these plants that are very invasive and actually very destructive in our Southern California region called the castor bean plant. In fact, the seed pods from the castor bean plant, I guess you can take that, and I think that's how you make ricin, which is this deadly poison. So when I see a castor bean plant that is sprouting up and I think I can uproot it, I do. I think I'm doing my community a benefit. Well, so recently I was starting to walk around the Rose Bowl and I noticed, oh, shucks, there are a bunch of castor bean plants starting to come up here. So I was pulling them out. And as I was doing that, I heard a woman walking around the bowl call out to me, and she said, "Stop, don't do that." And I thought, okay, I'm not going to get angry. And I responded, "Oh, well, these are actually really poisonous, deadly plants." And she said, "Still, don't do that." Well, I decided to not make a fight, not confront, because I don't like that. So I let her keep walking. I know I'm a bad girl. And then when she was out of sight, I finished the job. But I was reflecting on that. What would have been a better way to handle that? And I'm thinking now, well, I wish I had affirmed her for her respect for authority. Oh, yeah, I should add, she told me it's illegal to pull plants up on public land. Oh, okay. So I'm thinking now, I should have affirmed her and thanked her for respecting authority, one of her moral pillars. So I found when I was able to frame it that way and recognize that she was speaking out of the good value she held, then, and indeed, a value I shared, then it was easier to understand her and think about how if we had continued to talk, perhaps we could have reasoned it out. So, the wall of hostility, however, is not just outside of ourselves, it's also within. While others can perpetrate harm that impacts us, and it is evil, our reaction can also be a projection or an outward expression of our own undealt inner darkness. I think Jesus was the master psychologist. Just think about the Sermon on the Mount where he talks about judge not that you be not judged. You point your finger and there are 3 fingers pointing back at you. Well, have you heard yourself say or think something like, that person just believes whatever their news media feeds them? Or they're afraid to think for themselves? Or they just want to maintain their own status quo and return to the good old days. In reality, these statements can reflect our own hidden concerns that I might be blindly accepting certain beliefs, afraid to think critically, or that I'm uncertain about the truth, and that makes me uncomfortable, or that I dislike my own self desire to live in the past. So, see how our mind can deflect our own unprocessed work outward onto others? This is actually so that we can become aware of what's inside us, hidden within us, and then self-correct. Yet, our inner unprocessed stuff does get projected, and often in ways that cause pain to others. For example, my unacknowledged doubt can be projected as certainty. If I feel threatened by opposing views, I might project my discomfort onto the other person, seeing them as hostile or closed-minded, when in fact, it's my own feeling of threat that's being externalized. So we can see in psychological terms, projection does help protect the ego from discomfort. I read a devotional from the Center for Action and Contemplation, the Richard Rohr outfit, several weeks ago, and this is how they put it. The line dividing good and evil cuts through the heart of every human being. And who is willing to destroy a piece of his or her own heart? We cannot bear to see evil within ourselves, and so we disguise it as good, like desire for purity, common sense, and justice. Our persona, what we want others to see us as, says, I'm doing this for your good, when it actually manifests fear, control, manipulation, or even vengeance. But remember, vengeance is the Lord's. So I'd like to remind myself that when I argue with someone about the correctness of my political or religious views, I need to do a self-check to see how it might be a projection. But how do we do that? How do we face the shadows that we see and make a choice to bring them into the light? It seems we do so by facing ourselves in every reflection, in every moment, with some degree of compassionate awareness. In reflection, prayer, silence, what we're talking about in Sabbath school, facing my own demons loosens their power over me. And for those of you troubled by this, perhaps this question is helpful. Isn't it better to know that the demon is in your own heart where you can do something about it? Okay, so my attempts to find spiritual answers for how to live given the dividing walls of hostility being built in the U.S. and outside have thus been quite psychological so far. So now let's go back to this passage that Paul gives us. What was Paul preaching? How can Jesus' death put hostility in me to death? How can the cross reconcile me with those I disagree with? We learn how to be by watching others. By watching Jesus, we learn how love behaves. Jesus treated people with equality, behaved as a servant for others. Jesus humbled himself even to accept a humiliating death. The life and death of Jesus is the ultimate modeling of love. Jesus told us to forgive 70 times 7. He told us to love and pray for our enemies. He told us to lay down our life, stuff that is super counter ego, seemingly counter to human survival. Yet it makes sense that this kind of love is what would break down a wall of hostility. How does Jesus' life and death end hostility? Here's what makes sense to me. When we catch a glimpse of the unfathomable generosity, unconditionality of love, Jesus' modeling of this love, it melts our inner resistances and our hostilities towards ourselves. And when love melts our own self-hatreds, it makes us want then to extend love towards others. Haven't you noticed when you've experienced deep forgiveness or been shown love to agree that surprised you, have you noticed how you're quicker to smile at a stranger, more eager to forgive others' faults, more inclined to do a random act of kindness? Similarly, there is something about considering not only Jesus' death, but our own mortality and impending death that tugs at this attraction towards love. Here's an illustration. There's a Japanese film from 1952 titled Ikuru, which when translated means to live. It's about a man who lived a perfunctory life, obedient even if meaningless life. He stamped bureaucratic forms all day, day after day, year after year. And then he learns he has cancer and he's only got a few months to live. What does he do? He quits work and goes out to find himself, to live more fully before he dies. He explores food and women and frivolities, and he keeps searching. The scene, though, that I want to remember now is when along his journeying, a vagabond does harm to him. And he, in his bad off situation himself, asks, how can I hold hostility towards this man when I am about to die? Think about it. If you were on your deathbed, would you really want to be holding all these grudges? I'm guessing no. So why should we wait till our deathbed? So we've just considered some ways of addressing our own dividing walls of hostility. Just summarize. It's important to come and reason and value diverse perspectives, appreciating that even our moral foundations may be different by God's design. We've also considered how our inner shadow or darkness may manifest at such times, and these projections can prompt us to reflect and pray for inner healing. And lastly, Paul's counsel tells us that Jesus lived and died so that we might be one people. By accepting his great love for us, our love for others will grow and hostility will die. So I invite you on this 4th of July weekend to live knowing that the wall of hostility is gone. It doesn't mean we won't have disagreements and that they'll disappear. And it doesn't mean we stop working to effect good. But I think it may mean that we look at each other differently. We look at each other as parts of our own wholeness. We look at each other as parts of our own wholeness. Perhaps it's like we each are a small green curled leaf on a grand live oak tree. Together we make the tree live and provide shade and beauty for the glory of our Maker. Because of Jesus' life and death, out of many, we are one. Jesus has made us Jews and Christians, Gentiles and Jews, Muslims, Amish and Zoroastrians, one. Conservatives and liberals, one. Male, female, one. Young, old, one. Rich, poor, young, one. Gay, straight, one. Wherever the dividing line of hostility has been for you and for me, Jesus has crushed it. It's not there. We really don't need to recreate it. The dividing wall of hostility is broken. It's gone. So I invite you to join me to try to discover now how to live in this reality.